Good afternoon, and welcome to Vector's webinar on launching your AI and data career in 2023 with Phase AI. We've all seen the news headlines, and some of you here today may be feeling a little bit anxious about the AI job market recently, or uncertain about the next steps you should be taking in your career. But we hope today's session will help alleviate some of those feelings and provide you with a deeper understanding of what's to come in the labor market, demand for skills, as well as some concrete strategies you can use to position and brand yourself for optimal success in the search for your dream job. You'll also be hearing from some hiring managers in the Vector community here today who will offer some great advice as you prepare for your job search and applications. My name is Johanna Thum, and on behalf of everyone at Vector, I want to thank you for spending this time with us today. I'd first like to begin by acknowledging and thanking our funders, the Province of Ontario, the Government of Canada, through the Pan-Canadian AI Strategy administered by CFAR, and industry sponsors from across the Canadian economy. I also want to pause to acknowledge the land on which Vector is located in Toronto, which is now a meeting place for many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples, as well as newcomers to Canada from around the globe. The land we are situated on is a traditional territory of many nations, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the New Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands, and we are grateful for being hosted on this land. Now I'd like to introduce Wojciech Ryk from Phase AI, who will be delivering today's webinar. Wojciech is an AI researcher and scientist and an alumnus of Oxford University, where he studied on a Rhodes Scholarship. In addition to working with organizations to build out their AI strategies, teams, and AI-driven products, he also founded and sold his own company in customer analytics. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Wojciech.
Thank you very much, Johanna. It's a pleasure to be here, everyone. It's really exciting to be running another webinar with the Vector Institute. I'll jump straight into the presentation. As Johanna mentioned, 2023 is an interesting time to be launching your career. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of uncertainty, and we're hoping that today we'll be able to alleviate some of that. So today we'll be talking about a few things. We'll have an introduction, of course. We'll talk about recent market trends at a very high level, the labor market, the IT market, and the data and AI market specifically. We'll be talking about how to stand out. How do you actually get employers and potential hiring managers to actually listen to you, hear you, talk to you, and ultimately hire you? We'll talk about also the difference between technical and non-technical options. AI is changing really quickly right now. And this is one of the most, probably one of the most exciting times to be working in data and AI. And as a result of this, there's a lot of new opportunities and options for people in terms of the jobs that they might want to explore or the careers that they might want to start. And then last but certainly not least, we're going to have a panel discussion where we'll be hearing from a number of hiring managers and people who are both AI experts, building teams, hiring people, and they're seeing firsthand what's going on within the job market. So you'll be able to ask them questions directly to hear and get their advice. So just to begin, I do want to introduce myself as Johanna did. My name is Wojciech. My email is w@phaseai.com if you have any questions following this webinar as well. The reason that I'm so excited about this is that I was in your shoes about 15 years ago. I still remember graduating from U of T and wondering what the heck I'm going to be doing next and how to actually start that data and AI career. And since then, I've been fortunate enough to work at IBM Research as a researcher, at McKinsey as a consultant, and at Canopy Labs, where I was a founder and CEO, and where we were fortunate enough to go through Y Combinator. With Phase AI, we also work with a lot of brands who are building out their talent strategy or their product strategy around AI. And so we're seeing, again, firsthand, what are the challenges they're facing when it comes to actually hiring people, when it comes to defining roles, and when it comes to bringing the right candidates on board. And so all of the webinar today, all of the data, the discussions really stems from the conversations that we've been having and the projects that we've been running across the board. So I've done my best to try to distill these insights as much as possible, but also to make sure that they're very much informed by the challenges we're seeing today with employers and with companies in the data and AI space. So with that in mind, let's talk about recent market trends. I mean, it's probably a pretty confusing time for people. It certainly is for me. Every time I pick up the newspaper. The data and the stories are a bit all over the place. And this is one of the examples that I like to share. This is a screenshot from the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago, where you literally have on one side of the screen discussions about how CIOs are hiring more AI researchers, how they need to ship more apps, how there's a lot of pressure to have them grow their teams and execute. And literally 2 articles over, the IT job market is shrinking. So is this good news? Is this bad news? What's going on, right? It's so difficult to tell. And so I want to start with the technology sector itself. Of course, the news here, again, tends to be more negative than positive lately. There's layoffs. I mean, Meta just announced another 10,000 layoffs the other day. We've heard about Microsoft. We've heard about Amazon. We hear about, I mean, even Silicon Valley Bank and the challenges there might bleed over into hiring strategies in the long run. The IT job market is shrinking, but even here, even with these headlines, we see such an interesting, I'm going to say dichotomy, because the sub-headline for the IT job market piece is that information technology chiefs say competition for talent remains fierce. So what's going on? Are they hiring? Are they not? What are they looking for? And how do we stand out? And of course, the last piece that I will mention on this topic from a negative perspective is the actual numbers that we see. There are more layoffs happening now than before. This is a screenshot from a chart at layoffs.fyi that tracks both companies and employees laid off. And so, of course, there's been a pretty significant uptick from mid-2022 into 2023. And so as a result of this, can be really easy to be depressed right now or certainly demotivated and uncertain in terms of what's going on. But I want to present the case for optimism. There's also a lot of really good things going on, and there's certainly a lot of silver linings to appreciate and to look for. So when it comes to the optimistic side of things, first, we're all very data-driven people, so I want to share some metrics just to give us an idea of like, where do we stand if we forget the noise, if we forget the headlines and the scare tactics that are sometimes used in these articles. So first, from a labor statistics perspective, the economy is actually doing fairly well when it comes to unemployment and when it comes to people finding jobs. When you compare January 2023 to January 2020, the numbers are actually very, very similar. The unemployment rate, in fact, is lower today in Canada, and in Ontario, it's pretty much the same. The participation rates are pretty much the same, and the employment rates are actually a little higher. So when we look at it from this perspective, from like pure data, pure jobs, forgetting tech or IT specifically right now, people are finding work and companies are actually hiring. In fact, there is a lot of difficulty with finding great candidates or candidates at all for certain roles. The other thing that's really, really important here is really thinking about yourself in terms of your job prospects. And the job prospects are good. That's the other thing to keep in mind. Research across the board, whether it's surveys or interviews with candidates or early career professionals, what we're finding within these research projects is that career stability is similar today to earlier generations. When people are laid off, they find jobs quickly. When they do find jobs, they actually do stick around for a while. It's not the sort of thing that every 6 months we're looking for new jobs or trying to find new opportunities. And of course, even within the headlines and within the articles themselves, when we talk to technology companies and non-technology companies that are hiring data and AI researchers, there is a lot of competition for talent, and people are desperate to find those AI researchers and those data professionals to actually get them on board and to hire them. And what's even more positive and certainly makes me really optimistic is that this is expected to be the case for the next several years. When we look at projections from the Bureau of Labor Statistics or Statistics Canada, we see that there's 4 job categories that are expected to be in demand more than anything else in the next several years. The research goes up to about 2031 based on the census. Data scientists are number 1. Number 2, computer and information systems managers, database architects, database administrators. So these are all job titles, obviously very broad, and we'll be talking a little bit more about how to really dig through this. But these are the jobs that are growing, that continue to grow today, are expected to grow for the next several years. And so if you are starting a career in this space today, you should probably be very, very optimistic, even if the headlines might make you a little bit nervous. So, we might be a little nervous, a little sweaty, but at the same time, I think we should be really excited about the future and about what it means for our careers. And that is the case for optimism that I want to present. And that is how I approach literally every single one-on-one session that I work on with folks, and every single conversation that I have with employers. And it is consistent with my own experience, certainly. So what I do want to do then is discuss a few points based on this. If if we can be a little more optimistic, if there is still this competition for talent, then how do we actually manage ourselves, as individuals? Because again, it's easy to see the high level metrics, but what does it mean to you or for you today, right now, when you're applying for jobs or when you're looking for opportunities? So there's 5 key points that I want to bring up here, and I'll go through each of these. The first, it's okay to be stressed. It's okay to be a little uncomfortable right now. A lot of people are. And people are stressed out because of inflation. They're stressed out because of money. They're stressed out because of these headlines. And in fact, based on the research that we're doing, one of the things that is very consistent when it comes to the kind of the negative side of the metrics is that people are pessimistic. So even though the metrics are actually not so bad, and even though people are finding work pretty quickly, even in cases where they're laid off, what is consistent and consistently negative is people's fears and people's pessimism. And so that's not to say that's wrong. I just want to bring that up because if you're feeling this way, you're not alone. And so talk to a friend, talk to a counselor, talk to a mentor. It's okay to get that off your chest. And in fact, you should. The other thing that's common today, unfortunately, and what is causing a lot of the stress is that people are applying for more jobs. So people are finding work and people are finding great, interesting, and starting great, interesting careers. But what is changing today, even versus, I would say, a year ago, is the number of applications they're sending out. And this is a bit of an unfortunate negative feedback loop, because the more applications someone sends, the more recruiters have to review those applications, the faster they have to do it, the more coarse they are in terms of actually reviewing them. So they send more no's, obviously. As a result of that, people get more no's, they panic, they apply to more jobs, right? And so again, if you are actually going through this process and you've sent out 3 or 4 applications and you haven't heard back, that's okay. Don't worry. Keep going and certainly don't give up. And at the same time, if you're sending 10, 20, 30 applications, that's also not uncommon today. It is what unfortunately is happening. And so while I will say bear with it, there are also strategies to deal with it, which we'll be talking about. And one of the things that I will say that's really, really important and very few people do from this perspective is benchmarking yourself. We're all data-driven data professionals in this webinar. And what I'm always surprised about is when data-driven people take a non-data-driven approach to some of these processes. What I recommend is that when you do start applying, log all the applications and keep them in mind. If you're going to apply for 20 jobs potentially, especially if they're easy, one-click LinkedIn applies, there's a very good chance you'll forget that you applied to certain roles. And so keep track of the roles you've applied for and then track where things are dropping off. So is it that you're submitting applications and you're not hearing back at all? Is it that you're getting on a recruiter phone screen and the recruiters aren't moving you forward to the hiring manager? Is it that you're actually getting all the way through the technical interviews, but you're not getting the final offer? All of these challenges require different strategies for you in terms of how you would address them. And from a benchmarking perspective, just some numbers that we're seeing today, especially given the 25+ application piece that I mentioned. If you're submitting applications and you're getting more than 10 or 20% responses to those initial applications, so a recruiter or someone calls you to do a phone screen, that's pretty good. That's a good place to be. If you're at like 1 or 2% or you're getting 0 responses, then there's a good chance that you might need to work on your resume, or maybe the jobs that you're applying for aren't quite the right ones in relation to your resume or your skill set. If you are getting through and actually going to the final stages or the interviews, there's a good chance that 25 to 33% is the conversion rate to actually get a job offer. And again, you'll notice it's not 100%, it's not 99%. You might still have to do a few sets of interviews before you get that offer. Now, again, here, if you're not getting any offers, You might want to do some mock interviews. You might want to do some role playing to really see where things are falling apart. Maybe you're not communicating well. Maybe you're not passing the coding challenges, or again, whatever else might be happening within the interview process. The other thing to keep in mind is strategizing around who is hiring. Again, a year ago, if we were doing this webinar, or when we were doing webinars like this, everyone was asking about how they work for the FANGs, right? Meta, Amazon, Google, etc. This is changing quite a bit right now from a hiring perspective. And there's a few axes that I want to bring up here. The first is tech versus non-tech. Now, I want to emphasize, you are a technology and data professional, right? So you will be doing technology and data work regardless of where you go, but the companies you apply for could be non-technology ones. A lot of the fast growth, unprofitable tech companies today have actually significantly reduced their hiring, but a lot of non-technology companies, retailers, travel companies, airlines, financial services firms, banks are actually very actively hiring, and they're struggling quite a bit with regards to actually finding again, data and AI professionals to fill their roles. So that's one strategy you could take, is look for those quote unquote non-tech firms and apply there. The second is startups versus established corporations. I use the term startup here very loosely. What I really mean is, again, those fast growth, unprofitable companies, particularly ones that depend on venture capital to fuel their hiring plans or enable their hiring plans. There is a slowdown there in many ways relative to a year or 2 years ago. But again, larger established corporations that are profitable or doing well from a financial perspective are very actively hiring, again, particularly within the data, AI, and technology space more broadly. In fact, I would say some of them even see this slowdown as a bit of an opportunity to potentially leverage or hire talent that they wouldn't otherwise have access to. And finally, I also want to distinguish between IT and AI data. This is another thing. A lot of the articles that I showed you earlier on are talking about technology, about IT, right? That's a really, really, really broad space. And AI data is actually a significantly small chunk of that broader IT hiring landscape. And so even the distinction there is really important, because if you're sort of like a junior manager or middle manager within IT, your job prospects, again, I would say are still pretty good, but probably not as good as, let's say, an AI researcher or data professional who is specifically working on cutting edge research or comfortable with cutting edge research. So what do you do if you're focusing on non-tech corporations, AI data, and frankly, what do you do in general if you're looking for work here? What are some of the things that you might be able to leverage? We're going to talk about these in more detail throughout the webinar, but I do want to quickly sort of summarize them. Hybrid data science roles are really important and becoming more and more important. So this is where you are a data scientist, but you also do something else. You're a finance professional that knows how to do machine learning. You're someone who has a biotechnology background and you want to work for a biotech startup, but you also understand how AI works. This combination of skills makes you really rare and makes you an extremely interesting candidate for specific firms and specific companies. The second is emphasizing niche skills. 10 years ago, it was okay to put AI on your resume and people would say, hey, that's pretty cool. 3 or 4 years ago, it might have been NLP or computer vision. Today, you need to get more and more specific because these terms have become so broad and they've become so general that people don't really know what they mean anymore when you say you're an expert in those areas. Also, one of the themes that comes up a lot right now and will come up several times in this webinar is this, that specificity implies expertise. So when you tell someone you're good at natural language processing, for example, they have to take your word for it. If you tell them that you're good at reinforcement learning with human feedback in large language models, then that statement alone implies that you know at least what's going on in the cutting edge of NLP, and I can assume that you certainly have some capabilities there. Third, ride waves. There's a lot of topics that are getting a lot of attention right now. Generative AI, prompt engineering, GPT-4 yesterday. All of these things are things that employers are really nervous about. They're certainly very curious about. And so if you are capable or comfortable working in these spaces, make sure you bring that up in your resume. And finally, soft skills. As AI becomes more and more pervasive within industry, businesses are realizing that it's not just about throwing a bunch of technology experts at a problem. It's also about cultural change. It's about leadership. It's about communication. So all of these things, if you have those soft skills, if you're comfortable with product management, for example, you will stand out if you emphasize those soft skills. And frankly, there are jobs now, which again, we'll be talking about later in this webinar, that really focus on those soft skills rather than the hard tech that we were used to 5 years ago with an AI. Now, when it comes to keeping up with these skills, there's no right answer here, and there's certainly, this isn't meant to be a chart of the skills that you should be learning today. But what I do want to emphasize is, as you explore those niche skills, as you ride those waves that I was just mentioning, what you want to do is have a strategy where you're constantly learning and updating your capabilities. For example, if you're really focused on natural language processing, the kind of yellow bucket of skills here might be relevant. Learning what prompt engineering is, getting comfortable with large language models, even focusing or reading papers around things like reinforcement learning with human feedback are all examples of skills or technologies that you might want to pick up today that will make you a very unique and special candidate because so few people have it. If you're more on the ML ops side, this could be vector databases or federated learning or even privacy engineering, things that are really difficult for companies today because they're so bleeding edge. But this doesn't have to be limited to the technical side, right? Data visualization, if you know Streamlit, or if you're comfortable with no-code tools or even training people on no-code tools and citizen development, great opportunity. If you studied politics or public policy, government relations, AI ethics are topics right now that a lot of companies are struggling with, whether it's because of antitrust risk, because the specific technologies they're launching are within regulated environments, or something else. So what I really encourage you to do is, maybe on an annual basis, certainly right now as you're kicking off your career, do a skills audit. Ask yourself if the skills you have and the skills you present in your resume align with the jobs that you are interested in or that you're applying for. If the answer is no, then how do you pick up those skills and how do you learn them? And again, one example that I'll emphasize here, I focus quite a bit on natural language processing myself, which is why there's so many examples for that. But what I do want to emphasize is that idea of specificity. A lot of these spaces, whether it's computer vision, natural language processing, whether it's machine learning ops or auto ML or something else, they're getting more and more specific. And so you have to get more specific as well. So this means NLP becomes large language models, becomes reinforcement learning, et cetera. And again, this will be different for every single person, and your strategy might be different, but you want to move down to the right side of the spectrum, certainly. So what are some of the ways that you might be able to maintain these skills? Personal projects are one. I find sometimes what people will do is they will, let's keep using the large language model example. They'll say, okay, well, I haven't really kept up to date with this stuff. My NLP skills are maybe a few years out of date. Take a weekend, go to Coursera or Kaggle or Hugging Face or whichever YouTube potentially, and build a project. Learn how to use those new technologies just so that you get a feeling for them. You don't have to do anything overly complex, but at least you become aware of what's happening and what's changing. Micro credentials and one-off courses are a lot more popular now. Even in some cases, just one-off lectures where watching that, lecture 7 from a certain course about a certain topic that you want to learn about is a great way to do this. And actively doing this is really, really important. It actually surprises me. A lot of professional industries, whether you're a doctor or a lawyer, have regular workshops to upskill and train people in the latest developments within those spaces. AI hasn't quite gotten there yet, and certainly subfields of AI haven't necessarily gotten there. So you have to really go out of your way sometimes to do this on your own. The other thing that's really important here is how you present your skills. This is the concept of skills versus, let's say, past jobs, I think is becoming more and more relevant to a lot of people. Have a list of specific skills in your resume. You could, for example, a lot of people tell me they're good at Python. And again, Python is so broad. Are you good at writing the code? Are you good at data visualization? Are you good at rapid prototyping? I don't really know. But if you tell me that you're really good at Streamlit and related packages, then I know that you're following the latest data visualization trends. If you tell me you're really good at PyTorch, then I know that you're following some of the deep learning aspects, and that again you're good at Python, but you're good at a few other things as well. Within resume specifically, make sure you bold those skills and emphasize them within your past experiences so that we can contextualize them. So if a recruiter sees that, hey, you're good at PyTorch and Streamlit, that's great. But if you tell me that the last job you had, you were specifically visualizing financial data using Streamlit, that tells me a lot more about who you are and what you're capable of. The other thing that I would discourage you from doing is don't score yourself on your resume. Sometimes I see resumes where people say, hey, I'm a 5 out of 5 on Python and a 3 out of 5 on C++. I have no idea what these scores mean. The only thing they do, because by the way, they're subjective, right? You made them up. The only thing they do is they make me doubt your C++ capabilities. And I also find the people who use these sort of scores tend to be really hard on themselves. So get rid of them. You can qualify a lot of these things when you're going through the interview process. And of course, I'm assuming the skills you're putting on there are skills you do truly know and understand. And one thing you want to avoid is this idea of skill spam. We're seeing this more and more. People put as many skills as possible on their resumes. And again, it's not really about quantity. What you want to do is tell a good story and focus on the quality of your skills and your capabilities. So what I'll talk about for the next few minutes is standing out. So far, we've been chatting quite a bit about, what are the different trends and how do you leverage them? Specifically now, let's say you do have that resume, you're starting to reach out to employers. How do you do a good job? And I do notice also that a few people have submitted questions. If you do have questions, please submit them. I will address them after this session, and we'll have some time before we move to the panel discussion as well, potentially. And if not, I'll make sure, or I'll do my best, I should say, to bring them up in the panel discussion as well. So please keep them coming. I will definitely be reviewing them shortly. Okay, so standing out. First, we've run a lot of webinars with the Vector Institute on standing out. Here are a few links that are very, very relevant. They're all on the Vector Institute YouTube channel. How to accelerate your career, nuances around hybrid career trajectories, acing data and AI interviews. Again, depending where you're struggling or where things are difficult when you're building out that application CRM. You might want to watch different aspects or different parts of these webinars, but I do encourage you to visit them because there's several hours of really great content here. However, AI is changing. A lot of these webinars were also recorded during the COVID lockdowns. And so what I do want to talk about is what's changed over the last year and what is likely to change in the coming months for you to, again, really put your best foot forward. First, video is becoming more and more prevalent. And what I recommend here is if you're putting together projects, portfolios, or applying to places, put your best foot forward and make sure the channel or the medium you're using to promote yourself is aligned with what's actually most relevant to you. So if you're talking about data visualization and you're really good at it, don't write about it. Show me a data visualization. If you want to be an AI transformation consultant or a management consultant focused on AI, you're going to be doing a lot of client presentations. Maybe you should just record a 60-second introduction of yourself. Right off the bat, I will see you can present well, you speak confidently, and that will tell me way more than anything in your resume about how you can present yourself. Practice with video. People often do not actually use video until their first interview. And this is really difficult because you're not used to using video. Maybe you're not used to seeing yourself on screen. And so what I recommend here is do sample problems or short presentations by yourself. Just get a free account on Google Hangouts or Zoom or whatever. Record yourself, go to dinner, take a nap, come back. Once you've lost the context, rewatch the video and see if you still feel good about your presentation and critique yourself. Finally, be comfortable with video interviews. More interviews are being recorded today than before. And at the same time, sometimes companies are actually asking you to pre-record your answers or presentations so that they can be watched asynchronously. Unfortunately, this is the reality of the situation. Be comfortable with it if it does happen to you. Next, portfolios. Portfolios are getting more complex. and this is something again that comes up a lot. People are very skeptical about how much time they have to put into portfolios. I'll share some data later that shows just how important they are. But what I want to bring up now is really put effort into having like one or two projects that emphasize your capabilities and avoid standardized ones. 3 years ago, having an NLP portfolio where you talk about sentiment analysis of tweets, for example, was very common and worked really well. Today, I could literally download a GitHub repository that builds all of that for me. So it's becoming less and less. It stands out less and less in some cases. And the other thing that I want to ensure here is review projects regularly as a result. And also, one great project beats 10 mediocre ones. If you're throwing a lot of simple projects onto your portfolio, what you might want to do instead is take the time to build something really complex end to end, because end to end projects are hard to find. And also, finding employees that are good at taking a project from inception through to completion is really, really difficult. So invest time in projects in this way. Finally, edit your resume, edit for conciseness, edit for active language and active voice. I love using ChatGPT to run edits on this stuff. It's a great way to play around with some cool AI tools while actually improving your resume, which is awesome. And again, niche skills, niche software, better than broad stuff, but avoid skill spam. And of course, customize your resume to your applications, particularly your dream jobs. If there's certain roles that you're really, really excited about, make sure your resume is customized to those roles. Now, I mentioned people tend to be skeptical when I present this stuff. They say, do employers actually review my courses? Do they review my portfolio, or is it just about the resume? Is it just about getting through that first filter? And there's a lot of studies out there and surveys coming up that actually try to figure this out, particularly given some of the talent shortages in the space. And what I want to emphasize here is the 68%. So this is a survey from SAS that specifically interviewed and surveyed hiring managers, and 68% of hiring managers said that case studies and project work is the method they use to evaluate potential employees. Now, that's 2/3 of hiring managers. It's more than the number of hiring managers that call out degrees from academic institutions, right? Like, these portfolios are so important. The reason people, I think, are skeptical is because they don't have portfolios that are specific to the roles they're applying for, or they're doing some of the kind of the simpler projects where they're not really they don't really stand out that much. So really, if there's one piece of advice that I could give here, that like, if you remember nothing else, it would be really try and invest in those end-to-end projects, emphasize them, practice communicating them, so that people, hiring managers, recruiters, et cetera, really see how valuable your skill set is and how it could translate to you working at whichever company you're applying for. Finally, within all of this, the other thing that's really changing is networking. Networking is becoming more and more important. I mean, it's always been important, but I would say more important now even than before. And also the way we network is changing because so much of it is going on, and it's a bit of a hybrid networking scenario now, right? There's in-person events, there's also LinkedIn and other places. So the first thing I recommend for people doing is that if there are specific jobs you're interested in, reach out to people that are hiring managers or experts in the field, and specifically ask for the 10-minute meeting. What I mean by a 10-minute meeting is reach out to them via LinkedIn, email, whatever works. Let them know that you're interested in maybe working with them or applying for a job with them in some form, or maybe you just simply want to follow in their footsteps from a career perspective, and ask them if they are willing to share advice or feedback for 5 or 10 minutes. The reason that number here is important is that a lot of hiring managers will get lots of invitations for coffees or events or whatever else. They'll literally get like an invitation for an hour-long coffee. Now, the thing is, you're going to have to travel for that coffee. You're going to have to sit down. It might take over an hour. This is really asking for like a 2-hour commitment for a quick chat, right? And a lot of people can't do that. And so they just ignore those asks. But 10 minutes on a call, you can do that while you're commuting from home or from home or to work. And at the same time, it's so much easier. It's a very low barrier. So I do recommend this. And I also recommend really emphasizing what you could get out of it. So suppose that you're Lisa, and suppose that you are specifically interested in working in ML ops and healthcare. Finding hiring managers that are already working in that space and reaching out saying, look, I'm a recent graduate with a specialization in healthcare. I spent the last 6 months working on data visualization and search tools for healthcare data. Here's a sample project that I've done on my portfolio. And you could see how important the specific projects are when you're emphasizing them this way. I'm hoping to get your advice around starting a career in ML engineering and eventually working with a team like yours. You'll notice I'm not saying I want a job. I'm not, or Lisa isn't saying she wants a job. Lisa isn't saying that she is sending her resume and wants an interview. She's simply looking for some advice. And what's really beautiful about this too is that 10-minute call. If things go well, there's a good chance that someone like Martin might recommend specific jobs for her or specific opportunities. And of course, only do this if they're legitimate asks, right? You don't want to be reaching out to people just because they seem to be hiring for a lot of roles. You actually want to build a strong connection with the people themselves. And even if it doesn't convert into a job posting right away or a job opportunity right away, that's okay. It might in 6 months, or they might introduce you to other opportunities later. The other thing that I do want to bring up is in-person events. In-person is back. A year ago, this was not the case. I know that sometimes people are still a bit uncomfortable with in-person, but I do encourage you to get out there and meet people face to face. It's certainly quicker and a lot easier. That 10-minute networking ask that I mentioned can be done without a LinkedIn outreach by literally going to a person at an event and talking to them for 5 minutes and getting their feedback and advice, right? It saves a lot of time, saves a lot of energy, particularly if you are really focused and specific with the events that you're attending. And Vector has a lot of great ones that I'll mention at the end of this webinar as well, but definitely get out to those if you can. Okay, so I will take about 1 or 2 minutes to do some Q&A here. So thank you for those who have been submitting questions. Okay, so first question is for data science and ML engineering roles, is having a background in software important? How negatively does it affect the application if the candidate has not worked or studied software engineering but has AI and ML experience? Oh, this is, you know what, this is like the perfect question for this next session. But in short, I want to distinguish ML engineering versus data science here. I would say that for data science roles, not being technical or not being a software engineer is perfectly okay. There's a lot of people that can code or write scripts but aren't professional engineers. And now more and more we're seeing again roles where like product management or consulting roles where you don't need to code at all or very rarely. For ML engineering, because the role itself is one that focuses on actually taking models to production or focusing on performance, there you probably do need to have at the very least like architecture experience, like data architecture, systems architecture experience, and ideally be a software engineer. Do you have any advice for students that are looking for internships in this space? What can students do to secure a position after internships? Great question as well. In this case, what I would actually recommend is that networking that I mentioned. There are specific hiring managers, and again, if you see an internship posting, sometimes the department for the company will be mentioned, or sometimes the actual hiring manager might be called out. Go to LinkedIn, try to find the person, reach out to them, and build a relationship. And again, I think this 10-minute ask is the best way to do it. If you show them that you're already building projects in this space and that you're being active and proactive, that already tells you so much about a candidate, and building that relationship is really, really important. In terms of securing a position after your internship, I would say there's 2 things you want to do here. First is do a good job. I mean, internships are very much there for companies to find really talented, hardworking employees, full-time employees. So if you're doing a good job, that's number 1. Number 2 is be explicit with your manager, supervisor, or whoever's running the internship program. If you want to work there full time, if it's really important for you, make them aware of that, and even ask for feedback specifically about whether you're on track to do that. Again, most companies will use internships to fill the full-time funnel afterwards, but making it explicit, getting that feedback, improving if you're getting feedback on how to improve is really, really, really important. I know there are a few other questions, so I will save them for later. But I will do my best to address them. If we don't address them today, again, my email is w@phaseai.com. Feel free to reach out as well, and I'll do my best to reply. If I'm inundated, I do apologize in advance. Okay, some of the questions that did come up was around technical versus non-technical options and roles. So I do want to I do want to really dive into this in more detail. So first of all, and again, one of the themes that I think you're hearing over and over again is that data and AI roles are not going away, but the challenges being addressed are changing, and they will continue to change. They're getting more niche. They're getting more niche from a technical perspective, I should say. At the same time, companies are struggling with things like productization, culture, showing business value, things that are really quote unquote soft in nature. And so the roles that you're applying for, how you'll be thinking about these roles in the coming 6 to 12 months and longer, of course, will be changing. And so you wanna strategize around that. So when it comes to technical roles, the important thing is that there are more options coming up and there is more nuance in the roles themselves. Again, 10 years ago, you could have been applying for AI roles. That when I was starting my career in the AI space 15 years ago, it was literally like AI and machine learning was what we were doing. We didn't distinguish between subfields. We didn't distinguish between methodologies that much. Then things started breaking out. We had experts in NLP, we had experts in computer vision, in ML engineering or ML ops. And this was true even 1 to 2 years ago. What we're seeing now is the roles are getting more nuanced. There's just to use NLP as the example, there's research scientists, there's NLP engineers, then there's field-specific engineering like large language model engineers or privacy engineers that are very unique to NLP as a subfield of AI. Prompt engineering is another good example that's applicable to both NLP and I would say computer vision. So as you think about your career and as you think about your career trajectory, ask yourself, what are some of these really specific fields that you could emphasize and that you could really focus on and use to stand out, or maybe to apply for in some ways. To show you a few examples of what I mean, because so far I've been very theoretical, here are a few of these job postings that we've seen literally in the last few months that are coming up as a result. Prompt engineer and librarian at Anthropic. So Anthropic is builds large language models similar to OpenAI. They are literally looking for people who are very comfortable and good at interacting with prompts and large language models to test their capabilities in some way. The librarian side of things is really interesting as well, because more and more companies are also concerned about tracking the data sets that they are using, understanding the data lineage, how is data changing over time, both for regulatory purposes, for training purposes, and for other purposes altogether. So here's a really interesting job posting that you might want to explore to see how things are changing. Another example is Cohere, software engineer for model serving. So again, as we do more large models and foundation models that take hundreds of milliseconds to run, or in some cases multiple seconds to run, and there's so much demand for them, ML engineering, specifically within the context of foundation models and large language models and computer vision, are becoming more and more relevant. And finding people who are good at that specific thing is really, really difficult. So that's another example of a more technical role that you could consider or think about. Now, one of the questions that did come up is advice on how to complete projects end to end. What I would recommend within this context specifically is actually building projects where you provide an example of the problem you're solving. So maybe in this case, it's how do you actually streamline or build an API that, in a performant way serves a large language model. You could do that by downloading a copy of a large language model on Hugging Face, documenting what you're doing, discussing the architecture, but then actually building the code and then publishing it to GitHub, let's say. And then you've got an end-to-end project that's very specific, but right off the bat tells me so much about what you're capable of and also some of the research that you're interested in. The other thing that's really important here is soft skills. They are really, really, really hard to hire for. And it's also challenging because a lot of the technical skills, when people are good at the technical details, sometimes they struggle on the soft side. So finding people who are capable of both is difficult. Finding people who are good on the soft side of things, but are aware of AI research and aware of how models work is also extremely difficult. And so again, I want to show a few examples of job postings here, but then I'll talk about some of the trends. So expert solution architect, right? Solution architecture is a great example of a space where you need to understand the technology, but you ultimately also need to understand the business problems and map the technology to address the business problems. That mapping exercise requires a lot of communication, a lot of consulting, stakeholder management. It's really, really hard to do. And again, it's hard to hire for because those two skill sets, right? Collecting business requirements and dealing with stakeholders is so difficult, in addition to finding people who are also comfortable with understanding how far a technology can be pushed. Another example from Cohere, a senior product manager, foundation models. Product management in AI right now is a really interesting space that I think will only get more interesting over time. The reason it's so difficult to hire for, and why I think so many people who are good AI product managers, why they're in such high demand, is because, again, you need to understand what's difficult, what's possible, what's easy for AI models to do, but then you have to convert that to user requirements. You have to convert that to actually solving a problem that a user or customer might have, and that is really, really difficult. And by the way, the product manager one comes up a lot. Vector's hiring for that. BenchSci hiring for that. Consulting firms are hiring for that. So again, it's one of these things where if this could be your niche, right? Product management plus AI, and it's a really, really exciting one. Now, what I do want to talk about briefly here is when I mention things like AI product management, people sometimes ask, like, I know what product management is, I know what AI is. How the heck do you actually combine them? What are some of the day-to-day questions someone like this might be asking? And these are questions that come up across the board with all of these different roles, but I want to call out product management specifically. So a product manager in the space might be asking questions like, can we even build a model to address the user need? Specifically, like, is this thing that we want to automate or streamline for the user something that we can model with data? What kind of data do we need to collect in the first place? If we are building models or putting them in production, how do we communicate with users? If there's an error, if the model makes a mistake, if the model needs to provide feedback, is the model explainable? Certain users need to have explainable models, and they can't actually use deep neural networks that are too convoluted or act like black boxes. What is the cost of error? If a model is doing well, but sometimes make a mistake, what does it mean to make a mistake? And I'll give you an example here that maybe is quite stark, but with things like autonomous vehicles, there's a really interesting question around the cost of an error, both from a regulatory perspective, but also, like, let's get down into the nitty gritty of a model. What is a false positive or a false negative? If, let's say, I'm building a model to detect objects in the way of a car, a false positive isn't so bad, right? Because if a car thinks that there's something in front of it and it stops or swerves, I mean, it's not ideal, but it's not so bad. A false negative, where the car doesn't see the object in front of it, or the model doesn't detect the object in front of it and the car drives into it, that's a significant error, right? So knowing the distinction between a false positive and a false negative, understanding how model requirements translate into user requirements and also translate into the research your company might be doing is so difficult. And this is an example in product management, but this is true in consulting, in AI transformations, sales as well. Another example is how big is the data set that we need to build? There's a great blog post here that you can see later on the economics of data products. And one of the things that the author Abraham talks about is the difficulty of building what he calls a minimum viable corpus. We hear about minimum viable product all the time, and minimum viable corpus is building a data set that's big enough to actually train a model on, right? That's not a trivial problem. Like, how do you start? Where do you start? And so these are the sorts of questions an AI product manager might be asking, and you can see how understanding how models work is important, but it's not enough to be technical. You need to know the user requirements, product requirements, business requirements, and the economics of the product you're working on, which is why it's so hard to hire for these roles and why there's so much excitement around them as well. So some of the roles that are coming up that you might want to be aware of or following, product management, of course, I talked about this already. User experience as a maybe subset or certainly in relation to product management. Some of the questions I mentioned earlier, how do you communicate model errors? Do models need to be explainable? How do you explain the model? Is it with a visualization? Is it with a beep, a noise? Is it something else? These are all really important user experience questions and design questions that we simply don't even have best practices for today. Sales and marketing, particularly go-to-market. What I mean by go-to-market is sales and marketing roles that require you to take a product that's never been sold before. This tends to be particularly difficult because account executives or marketers within this context don't have marketing materials yet. They might not know if the thing they're selling actually is necessary for users. They don't know what are the best channels. And so again, you need to really understand user needs here. You need to be good at sales, but you need to also know what's possible from a modeling and AI perspective, or certainly from a product perspective. And finding people who are comfortable with this uncertainty, with this technology is, again, really, really hard to find. Finally, what I will also bring up here is around solution engineering. So solution engineering as a potential a capability for you. Solution engineers, I already talked about a little bit. The idea behind this isn't so much around taking a product to market, but around solving a problem for a user or a customer with the technologies that have already been built. So how do you architect the solution? How do you understand the customer's needs and map them back to the product? And you can see across, this is just understanding AI in different ways, or understanding the product in different ways. And finally, digital transformations or AI transformations. What I mean by AI transformations here is, again, it's a type of consulting. It's, a lot of businesses are excited to change their operations and how they work today. And they want to use AI to do that, but then they actually hit a wall. They build these interesting models and no one wants to use them. And so these consultants, digital transformation or AI transformation consultants, have to ask questions like, do the models work? Do they work well enough? Are they consistent enough? Or do employees not trust or use these insights because the models don't work? Or maybe the data wasn't correct in the first place. Maybe employees weren't involved in the process of building these models, so they'll never use them. If we do create new processes where we take an old manual task and automate it via AI, how do we know if it's working? How do we know if it's working well enough? These are questions that consultants need to answer. And at the same time, again, they need to know the AI components. They need to be comfortable with the modeling process and the challenges of the modeling process, but they need to be then also comfortable with culture change, with process management, stakeholder management, communication, etc. So this is what I mean by some of these really difficult technical, non-technical roles that are so incredibly important to hire for, and at the same time difficult to hire for. And I think they will only become more and more popular, certainly in the next 12 months, if not the next decade. Now, the last thing I want to mention, and we have had webinars on this before, but it's also come up within a few questions here, is hybrid data scientists. So when I say hybrid data scientist, what I mean is a subject matter expert that also happens to be a data scientist. Everything I've talked about so far has been in the abstract, right? You could be a product manager with AI capabilities in pretty much any field. With regards to this type of data scientist, what I'm specifically thinking about is people who have one foot in a subject area that is difficult to learn about, and they're also good at some form of data science or AI. So you might be, let's say, you were an account manager at a financial services firm, and then you pivoted into data science. So you know how financial products work, but you also know data science. That makes you really unique and special for financial services firms. We see a lot of biotechnology folks, whether it's people with undergraduate degrees in biology or people who have spent a few years working in industry, also pick up AI skills. Again, what's really, really exciting is this combination, because if you're a biotech company, like let's say BenchSci, one of the companies we were showing their job postings for, finding people who can do both of those things is really hard. And ideally, that's who you want. You don't want someone who does one really well, but not the other. You want someone who can do both generally pretty well. So if you are someone that has some of these underlying skill sets that, again, maybe it's a career pivot, maybe it's just a different set of jobs that you've done in the past. Emphasize that and show how that makes you really, really unique. It is such a valuable set of combinations. If you're struggling with this, by the way, I do find when we do our one-on-one sessions with the Vector Institute, a lot of feedback people get is to remove some of these kind of like irrelevant roles when they get advice from guidance counselors or other places. So my advice is the exact opposite. Emphasize it, wear it proudly, and tell that story to the recruiter, the hiring manager, on why those skill sets are so valuable and so important for your specific role or your specific career path. So we have a few minutes here to answer a few other questions that are specific to what I've been talking about. And again, if we don't get through all of them, I'll try to bring them up in the panel as well. So one of the questions that is coming up is cloud knowledge required for a career in AI? If so, for which roles and what levels expected from freshers? Great question. I would say it really does depend a little bit. If you're an AI researcher or someone, so I would say actually two buckets. If you're a researcher where it's more about experimenting and prototyping, you probably don't need to worry too much about cloud. I mean, you should be aware of it. And again, there's an exception to every role. There's certain roles that do require this, but I find really understanding how to build models from first principles, how to build data sets is important. Similarly, if you're doing product management or consulting, being aware of what is relevant from a cloud perspective, what are some of the latest offerings and features from cloud services is important, but you don't need to be a certified AWS expert or anything along those lines. Now, on the flip side, if you're doing ML engineering or ML ops or even auto ML type work, there's a good chance that your company is probably using some cloud solution, and being an expert there, I think, does become a really important skill set. What I would recommend you do, however, is look at the jobs you're interested in and explore them, and see like the job posting itself, see what requirements they bring up. Do they bring up knowing certain cloud systems or certain cloud infrastructure systems? The other thing that I would encourage is this is a good question for the panel, so I'll make sure to make a note of it, and if I don't ask it, please ping it in the Q&A. The other question here is, can your GitHub profile work as a portfolio? Absolutely. But what I do want to emphasize here is there's GitHub portfolios that I see where people simply post their repositories and that's it. That's not a portfolio. That's just a list of repositories. What you want to do is have a README file or something on your GitHub site or your GitHub profile where you guide the recruiter through the projects themselves and explain why you've worked on those projects and what they actually meant and why they were significant, why they were difficult. Thinking about it a bit differently, make it as easy as possible for the hiring manager or the recruiter to get a perspective of who you are as an individual. If I just see a list of repositories, I now have to go to each repository, I have to play around with it. That takes a long time, so I might not actually do that. Or alternatively, I might pick the wrong repository. And if I pick the one where you didn't actually put a lot of effort into it, now I'm thinking like, well, this isn't that interesting. So guide the user, I say user, but it is really a user experience problem, right? Guide the hiring manager, guide the recruiter in that way. Personal websites are a bit easier to do this with because you have full control over the layout. But I would say if you've already done this with GitHub, that's a good place to be. So another comment, or a question, can you comment on resume skill spam in the context of automated resume screening? Many companies seem to have automated screening as a first pass. Absolutely, this is a huge problem. And this is, again, another reason why we see 25+ applications. So a few things here. Remember, your goal is not to get past the screener. Your goal is ultimately to get the job. So if you're doing the skill spam strategy and you're getting through to the phone interviews or the screening interviews, but you don't actually know those skills really well, that just means you're going to get rejected later. So it's really not that helpful. It'll pump up your numbers. You'll have like vanity metrics for your CRM around your job applications, but you're not going to get any closer to getting the job that you want. So that's why I avoid it. Getting no early saves you a lot of time, right? Number two, this is why where the networking piece and the storytelling piece comes in. You want to have a list of those skills, but you want to tell a good story. If you're not getting through those automated screeners, reach out to the hiring managers or try to find them in some way. And that's another way to get through those screeners as well. Okay, so we are up at 1 o'clock. So I will segue to the panel discussion. But before we have everyone join, I'll just briefly introduce the panelists. So we're very, very, very fortunate to have three awesome folks joining us today. We have Ivy Chu, who is the manager of special projects and innovation at TELUS. She has an academic background in engineering, a PhD in engineering, and she is also focused on a huge range of projects from responsible AI, healthcare, through to obviously AI research. So Ivy, thank you for joining us. We have Sameer Bachi, who is an expert in AI and autonomous driving. Please don't hold me to account for my false positive versus false negative example around AVs, but he is currently at AvidBots, which is a robotics company that sells globally. And again, he's been working in the AI space for over a decade. And we've got Suneet, who is a principal talent advisor and HR business partner at Thomson Reuters. And he is both responsible for keeping their talent strategy up to date. So understanding what are the skills that are coming up and how do you hire for them, looking at the data behind the scenes, but also getting involved in the projects themselves. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you, Sameer, Suneet, Ivy, for being here. Oh, there's Suneet. Hello.
Hi.
Sameer. Hi. Thank you all three. Thank you all for joining us. So maybe I'll start with a question, and then I'll use that to also go through the Q&A afterwards. You know, we just spent an hour talking a little bit about some of the trends and skills people should be developing, some of the ways that they should stand out. I'd love to hear from each of you. You know, if you were meeting one-on-one with a student or a recent graduate just starting their career in AI right now, what is the one piece of advice that you would share with them to really you know, help them succeed maybe in applying to your specific company? And Suneet, maybe I'll start with you.
Absolutely. No, that's a perfect question to kick this off. I think network. Like as you were talking about it, I think that's where I want to start with for each student out there. Focus on networking with individuals from your space. LinkedIn is one place for sure, but then going to conferences in person, like attending these kind of webinars as an example. So focus on your network. In terms of like the technology space, like it's tempting to dive straight into the latest tools and technologies, but do not miss out on the solid foundation that you have to build across your domain, because there's just a lot to focus. Like when you grow, you will learn more technology, more breadth, but that foundation is what will make you successful in the long run. So these are just two things I'll call out.
Amazing, thank you. Ivy, any thoughts?
So I think I also just want to lead off by saying, like, the first role out of school, whether it's your bachelor's, master's, or your PhD, will always be the hardest one to land, right? So I just want to tell everyone on this you know, on this workshop to just keep on keeping on, right? And I think this is one of those things that, you know, so yes, I've done a bachelor's, and the first position out of that was hard, and then I went from my master's straight into my PhD, and then the first position after the PhD was also very hard. I had to do a couple of pivots, so I just wanted to let you know that, you know, in case you're finishing your whether it's your bachelor's, your master's, or your PhD, it is always hard to land that first position. So just keep on at it. I also want to emphasize that sort of what Suneet was saying is, like, it's not always your technical skills and the latest, greatest thing that you want to apply, right? Remember that sometimes you could just solve something very simply. I was on a call yesterday with another with another manager of innovation in Norway, and they were saying that they actually were able to see in a pilot 2 times results just using averages, maxes, and mins. So you know, you could just think of very basic stats, right? We're not talking about neural networks. We're not talking about, large language models. He said we were able to achieve those savings just by something very simple. So I just want everyone to keep that in mind. Those two pieces of advice in mind. So yeah, I'll pass it over.
That's wonderful advice. And Samir, what are your thoughts?
Well, a bit what the other guys were saying, but I would also add, so if you are going to creating a project in GitHub, please collaborate with each other. It actually helps, that shows that you can collaborate, you can take accountability. When you work with each other, it's really nice because you collaborate as well as a team, but also you are accountable. So actually take the time to deliver the project that you are working with your friends or colleagues, and it's also very helpful for networking. As a hiring manager, when I see that you are actually collaborating with others, it makes more sense. It actually takes from me that, okay, you are a person who can collaborate. So it takes that tick of soft skills, because collaboration needs soft skills. So really pay attention to that. So if you start a new project, try to get some friends and then work together on that.
That's awesome advice. Thank you so much, Samir. And one of the questions that has come up, and I think Ivy kind of alluded to this as well, listing the different types of degrees, and it doesn't really matter where you're coming from. But one of the questions that comes up regularly in our sessions is, how important is a PhD? Either to, like, for any roles, for all roles. I'm curious, again, you're all in very different spots in different types of companies. What would be your advice? And Ivy, since you maybe I'll start with you this time. Should we all be getting PhDs? Should we be sticking around in academia as long as possible? Why or why not?
So that's a very good question. So I'm going to start off by saying, if the PhD makes you happy, do it, right? I have to say, I spent 4 years working on things that I felt really passionate about. I truly felt an interest. So if it makes you happy, do it. There are ups and downs with PhDs, as there are in the working world, right? So as being someone who's been on both sides, both before the PhD and after the PhD, the grass is always greener, right? So you're not gonna, once you land that job you want after your PhD, whether it's in academia or in industry, there will be ups and downs in either one, right? So my advice with the PhD is, if it makes you happy, do it. And then the other thing too is, I believe that having a PhD is not a necessity, right? So that's one of the things that I've kind of come to a conclusion. I finished my PhD in 2010. So it's been like a full 13 years. I've had lots of time to reflect. I don't think it's necessary, but I do feel that, for me, I picked up lots of skills that I still use today, including things like writing papers, giving presentations, being able to, sort of do a little bit of research, and then, put together a plan on how I want to approach things. So I think we talked about the soft skills. So a lot of the soft skills certainly do translate well when you do work through a PhD. Although, to tell everyone the truth, like my PhD is in mechanical and industrial engineering. It's not in AI specifically, although I used AI. So it's one of those things where, there are ways to translate your degree. So that's
wonderful.
sort of like my high level answer. Happy to discuss in more detail. But
so not necessary, but which is great, I think.
Yeah.
And one of the other questions that came up here is also subfields and specializing in them. And so I'm going to turn this into maybe a two-parter with the last question to Samir specifically. You've worked, I imagine, with when it comes to autonomous vehicles, there's a lot of computer vision work that goes on there. When it comes to subfields, like, let's say someone does want a job in computer vision or natural language processing, which, Sunit, I'm going to go to you afterwards at Thomson Reuters. Does that require a PhD? That sort of subfield specialization? And if not, how do you show people that you are good at, say, computer vision or autonomous vehicles or whatever without a PhD?
In general, there is also a bias about why you need a PhD to go in data and AI. And this is actually from the beginning of 2012, 2013, because the only guys who could work in AI and computer vision, especially, they were all doing PhDs. So there's a bias that everyone should do a PhD to work in computer vision. But now it's not anymore the case. There are a lot of courses out there which do computer vision, and actually you go quite in detail to how you build a computer vision algorithm, how you deploy it, what are the negatives and the pros of such algorithms. So definitely it's not required. I have people in my team which they don't have a PhD, they are working in computer vision, they are doing most of the work, and they are also doing research work. So it doesn't mean that by not having a PhD you will not be able to do research work. So yeah, it's not required anymore. I think the field has advanced a lot. There's a lot of information out there, so it's easy to actually pick up skills that you need for doing a good job. And same,
Amazing.
I think, is valid for NLP and the other fields.
Neat, do you agree, disagree?
I agree. Yeah, no, that's my comment. I think these days we look at experience versus education background. Like if they have experience, and like there are so many courses out there, there are so many projects out there which you can get involved in and get that exposure, versus actually able to just do masters or PhD to land up a job in research or NLP space. Even in our company, we have examples. We have two directors, one coming from a conventional background, following the masters, PhDs, and then being here. But then similarly, we have a person who just did a bachelor's, but he's also a director of research science and in the NLP space. But all of that was with experience, with being a part of multiple online courses, attending a lot of these publication sessions. He has some patents on his name as well because of being a part of those projects with other researchers. So gaining real-time exposure versus education, I think I don't have a preference here, but again, it's not mandatory at all.
And Suneet, that's a beautiful example, that individual. And this actually comes up a lot also in the one-on-one sessions that we do with the Vector Institute, because people want to ultimately be in those kind of more senior roles because they think about their longer-term career paths. What advice would you have for people when they're picking their first job, whether or even picking the company they might want to work for? How do they know if it's a company that will, say, give them those opportunities to go, pick up new skills, research, improve their research skills, and ultimately move into like a research director or a more senior person within that space?
Right. No, that's a great question, especially in 2023, where we have to be very careful of what companies we choose. So I think asking these questions right from, ask more about what is the company's or what is that team's budget in terms of learning and development, if there is a budget at all. Like, do they get to have those opportunities? Ask them about their wellness programs, health related programs as well, because that is going to talk a lot about the culture that's there at the company. Versus just the work itself. The work will be done. So talking to them about team, talking to them about the culture within the team, and also asking them for some examples, asking the hiring manager themselves that, hey, can you share your story with me, probably your experience with the company, how you've progressed, and let's say the person is a director or a VP, like how you've reached this level. Can you share that journey with me? And within those answers, you will be able to find out if they are investing in growth, investing in learning for individuals. If they tell you that, yes, they have access to trading platforms, they give free subscriptions, that's just one thing. I think actually intentional investment is when people are spending time in mentorship. There are mentorship programs in the company. That is the intentional piece that I always look for. And I always suggest that students ask for these questions when they're landing up jobs and they want these companies where they can grow.
Amazing. Ivy, Samir, do you have any thoughts on that question as well in terms of vetting those opportunities or companies up front?
Well, I mean, as Sunil said, this year is very important to find the right companies, and I don't think you guys should be discouraged. There's a lot of companies hiring people there. I had some actual ex-colleagues that they went laid off and they found a job right away, like 2 weeks after they had already a job. So it's not that gloomy, the environment. It's still, there's a lot of companies there hiring people, and it's very important. Your first job, it's probably going to define big part of your career. So pick the right company initially, basically, when you are choosing which company you want to work and what you want to work with. So it's very important to do your work, diligent work about the company, the culture, what kind of products they have been developing. Try to see if they have presentations in YouTube or wherever where they show their roadmap, what are their plans. A lot of companies, they try to, a way to attract investors and customers is to actually be quite open about their development processes forward. So it's very important if you get this, and basically it educates you about what kind of possibilities you will get in those companies.
I love that. And one thing I'll mention there too, as a hiring manager, I imagine if your company is open like that, you kind of expect that candidates or applicants have actually reviewed some of those materials so that they've invested the time and energy to learn what your company is doing and maybe keep you accountable when during the job interview process.
Yeah, generally, if in my interviews, if I find someone that just read before the interview about the company, I tend to not take them to the next interview.
There you go. Ivy, any thoughts to add there? Do you think any way that we can keep employers or basically understand what kind of support employers will provide us when we're applying or choosing which companies to work for?
Yeah. So I do want to top up on the culture. I think I've heard both panelists mention the culture. It's very important, right? You spend a lot of time with your coworkers, even in a remote setting. And then what I found too is that like-minded people will congregate together, right? So if you choose an employer who has this good cultural fit for you, and they're open and they're transparent, they're going to attract employees like that, and that's how you can feel that you fit in, right? And that's how you find your interests, and that's how you can do your best work, right? So that's sort of my comment. And then sort of my other comment too is, like, I know that the idea of not having remote work as a possibility is now almost like zero, because the one thing that the pandemic showed us, it's possible, right? So I think, in the interest of work-life balance, right, if that is something that you're looking for, then you also need to be upfront about that. I have actually turned down an offer, but I have actually concluded discussions with potential opportunities by saying, well, if I can't do that, then I'm not coming, right? And I think it's, we all need to recognize that life is not work, right? So it's one of those things, like, where you kind of want to look at your priorities outside of work and say, well, will it make it easier if I can do 2 days at home, or any day at home without having like a note of some sort, right? And I can tell you, and I'm going to be very frank, and I'll talk about this in another talk with the caregivers and machine learning, but I'm going to talk about how, having that flexibility to be at home for your children. And when I first started working in industry again, I had very young children. It makes a huge difference, right? So those are some of the things that you want to consider for your current life, or your, even like 5 years into the future. And I think, those are the important things. Remote is a key component of keeping an engaged workforce and keeping women in the workforce, and STEM specifically.
That's great advice. I think if there's one thing I'm hearing across the board too is, look, if you're starting a career here, like, really be intentional and thoughtful about the companies you're picking, why you're picking them. It's not just a matter of landing the first job and taking it because, hey, it's there and thank goodness, right? One question that comes up a lot, and it has come up, I think, a few times in the Q&A, is engineering. Both in terms of, do I need to know how to code to land a job in data and AI? And if I don't, how much of a problem is that? Does anyone want to volunteer to answer that first? Maybe, do we need to learn how to code? Do we need to be expert software engineers? Or how do we even make the decision?
I can take a shot at that. Generally, if you are a data scientist and if you are applying for a data scientist role, knowing the being a really good software engineer is not really important. Most of the time, you basically are going to mostly work with models, and the model is probably going to hand that to the production team, and they will write a very good engineering code, or they will write very kind of tested code around that model. So it's important to actually be able to understand the modeling, what data science means, and how to basically get the best model out there, and the best model that can survive in deployment as long as it's possible. That's the best thing. But if you can do engineering as well, that is a just plus, because basically you can collaborate directly with different stakeholders, and that will make your life much easier, and your possibilities to actually get a job much easier, because then instead of having two people, the companies will just have one in that sense.
Awesome. Ivy, do you agree, disagree?
I think it's very helpful to at least have some sort of background in the coding. And I think one of the things that is, what we're trending towards is sort of the ML ops model, where you develop the model and then you put the model in production. So that is actually like on the ML ops side, that's like a whole new, a whole other career path, really. And if that is like what you want to do, then, it's kind of necessary to, understand coding there for sure. And then, to understand sort of like the whole cycle, I think you do need to have coding knowledge. So
makes sense. Suneet, thoughts, comments?
No, I agree with both the panelists here, because any role, I think, be it research, be it ML, NLP, we have seen that they should understand code. They don't have to potentially write it themselves. There are going to be engineers they partner with on a day-to-day basis. So it's just that knowledge of code, understanding code, what's there. Even sometimes to write a pseudocode, for example, like I'm going to talk about our architects here, that explaining a requirement document and adding pseudocodes there helps a lot, but they won't be the ones who are actually writing and implementing it. So just the understanding is important.
Because this is where that collaboration piece seems to come in as well, showing that you can collaborate with people, problem solve together becomes so important. Okay, so we have time for maybe two more questions. So one that comes up, different forms of which have come up, is portfolios and projects. So I think people get really stressed out about what kind of project it should be. Is it okay if it was one with a professor or with coursework? What does it mean to be an end-to-end project? So Suneet, maybe you can start here. I'd love to hear, how important are these projects to you at Thomson Reuters, and what would be your advice in terms of people who are building projects to make sure that those projects stand out and really emphasize their capabilities?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think projects are making a lot of difference these days. They are the ones that's going to help you stand out versus the crowd. So for sure, portfolios or projects that you have, add them to the resume. Also making sure that you have hyperlinks attached in your resume. Like doing a description is okay, but actually take the hiring manager, take the recruiter, land up on your portfolio and see your projects there. Because I think these days, textual JD sort of resumes, even ChatGPT can create a resume today. But how can you make it more personalized is what matters. So add what you have done, what you have achieved. In your projects, look at some quantifiable achievements you can call out. There might be some metrics in it, like if there is a model, how you have made it efficient, how this model has made the process efficient, like something, call out those quantifiable achievements in your projects. Show the teamwork. One point that Samir mentioned in the beginning, that collaborating with your team, work with friends, work with your students in the university, and show that spirit of teamwork, because that's very important going forward, especially as we work in this hybrid model, because there are going to be workers remote and some of them in the office. So we have to collaborate. So that is also important to showcase in your projects, in your portfolios. But absolutely, this is a game changer. I think one of the teams that we hire for here, they have clearly said without a portfolio, they won't be able to move forward. So
Oh,
it's
wow.
not the resume or the cover letter anymore. In fact, cover letters have diminished over a period of time. Now I think your portfolio is your cover letter.
Hmm. Wow, that's very interesting. Samir, thoughts? Would it be similar at AvidBots?
Yeah, it's a bit similar. Basically, I still hire people without the projects, but in general, it's the first thing I see. I always would classify you hire. So basically, if you have a project or a GitHub page where you show off your work, I'll definitely give a chance. And I do actually go and see your commits, see how you do the commit, what kind of text you
Wow.
include, just to try to understand actually how good you are and how structured you are, because that's a key important thing. I mean, we have processes here and we have to keep those processes. And if you know them already, then it's a very good benefit.
I'll make sure to edit my GitHub commit messages in that case, because they certainly probably won't meet your standards. Ivy, what about TELUS?
I think just in general, like showing that you have like you have these projects is very useful, especially since we recognize that people don't, especially this audience, like people are not like doing one thing for 10 years. So I think
Hmm.
having a variety of projects shows that you're able to learn, even if you're not like, even if you didn't do your PhD in that area. It certainly shows that you're able to be, you can learn how to do new things, right? And I think that's how my team works. Like people work on different projects throughout their,
Hmm.
our stay with us, right? So no one works on one thing 24/7 or 40 hours a week rather, because I was just talking about work-life balance. And I think that just shows like you are flexible and that you sort of keep up with what is necessary, and sort of like you're a lifelong learner, right? So
Hmm.
also that kind of perspective is just like, from my point of view, like no one does the same thing for 10 years at a time
Hmm.
in one place anymore, right?
Great point. And just one tactical question, maybe as our final one. Someone's asked about non-disclosure agreements. So let's say they are building a project portfolio and they want to showcase some of their industrial work or their work with a prior employer. Do any of you have advice in terms of how to approach that? Like, can you have those projects? How do you get permission? What do you bring up with your potential with your employer or old employer? Anyone have a point of view on that?
I didn't understand again the question. So if you have an NDA for another company.
Yeah, so let's say you want to showcase a project in GitHub or your personal website that was developed under NDA with your past employer or during an internship. How do you approach that? Can you do it? What would you do to get permission?
Yeah, in general, I haven't done that before, so it's a new thing for me as well. If that's the case, I had never been
Okay.
asked on that. So, but it is easy for us to sign an NDA agreement. We signed that with many different collaborators and companies, so that wouldn't be an issue.
Got it.
I think I can take that one because we do come across these kind of questions from candidates a lot. So most of the times, whichever company you apply with, keep that portfolio private in a way. Like if it's a link, if it's a document, keep it private and only share with the company directly. Like if you're coordinating
Got
with
it.
the recruiter or someone from the talent acquisition team, share with them directly, because each company, as part of their interview process, there's a confidentiality agreement which they are not allowed to and they're not supposed to share any of your documents
Mm.
as part of your interview process with anyone. So don't worry, all of that is staying under sort of that confidentiality piece. And then at the same time, remove any confidential information that you don't want or you feel it's not important for the hiring manager or the interviewer to see. You can simply
Mm.
add company name to XYZ. You can just focus on metrics. You can focus on the quantification of items, but remove anything that you feel gives a hint of the sort of the company itself. So that's
Perfect.
what I've seen happen with us, because for sure we have seen this question coming up a lot.
Perfect. Thank you. I realize it's almost 1:30, so I'm going to conclude there. Ivy, Sunit, Samir, thank you so much for being a part of this webinar. I know all of you are active on LinkedIn, so I'm going to, for better or worse, volunteer you to if anyone wants to follow up or connect, please reach out to folks on LinkedIn. But thank you again so much, and we look forward to some of your future webinars and content as well. So I'll say bye, but before everybody else leaves, I'm just gonna jump back to my screen share. I do want to thank you all for attending, and I do want to call out a few events here that are coming up. I won't go through them all, but links will be in the chat as well. There's a few events around computer vision. There's a Scotiabank information session, a small mid-sized enterprise networking event, and of course there's the Vector Digital Talent Hub. So you've got a lot of different opportunities to do that networking that people have emphasized. And finally, I'll also mention there still are spaces for the small group consultations. If you have questions we didn't answer or address today, we do have spots at those group sessions where you'll be able to chat one-on-one with myself and a few other folks to work on your portfolio, to work on your resume. So thank you to the Vector Institute. Thank you to the Vector Institute's funders and supporters. We hope you all had a wonderful time today, and we all wish you the best of luck in your job search and kicking off your career in 2023. Have a wonderful afternoon.